They said the screams never left the walls, that even when the house was torn down, the sound, low, wet, and almost human, still rose from the soil like steam. Locals called it the breath beneath Blackridge. What they didn't know was that between 1847 and 1851, 17 young men were bought, used, and quietly erased from existence, all under the authority of one man and the obsession of his daughter. Every death was filed as natural causes, every purchase deliberate, and every secret buried in ledgers that survived a courthouse fire almost 60 years later. But the documents tell a different story, one of psychological control, ritual exploitation, and a master who believed he could cure his daughter's mind by feeding her another man's life. This is not a ghost story. It's not folklore. It's a glimpse into how the powerful hid their sickness behind the mask of science, and how the most monstrous acts are often written in perfect penmanship. Tonight I'm going to show you what really happened at Blackridge Plantation, and why history buried the truth under polite words and sealed ledgers. Brace yourself, because once you hear this, you'll never trust a civilization the same way again. In the mid-1800s, Lauderdale County, Alabama, looked like a portrait of Southern prosperity. White columns, polished verandas, and a ruling class that called itself a refined. But refinement has always been a costume for control. Cornelius Vanderhorn, the master of Blackridge, was no exception. He was a man of numbers, a merchant-turned-planter who measured human beings the same way he measured cotton bales, by weight, yield, and durability. His ledgers were immaculate, every entry perfect, every death justified, and beneath those neat lines of ink lay a secret experiment. You see, Vanderhorn believed his daughter Eugenia suffered from what doctors called a nervous disorder of the female temperament, a vague, fashionable diagnosis used by wealthy men to rationalize what they could not understand. But Vanderhorn twisted it into something darker. He convinced himself that the cure required proximity to life force, that the vitality of young men could stabilize her humors. In other words, he turned a medical theory into a license for ritualized violation. Each new slave was purchased not for labor, but for sacrifice, disguised as medicine. And the plantation became a stage where the sickness of one family was fed by the silence of an entire society. The first recorded death was Isaiah Pewitt, 19 years old, strong, quiet, and newly bought from Huntsville. His name appears in Vanderhorn's 1847 ledger beside a chilling note, suitable for ease purpose, quiet disposition essential. Ease, that word would appear 17 times over the next 4 years, each time followed by a young man's death. Isaiah was reassigned from the fields to the main house after just 3 weeks. No one knew why. He was seen less and less until one morning he was gone. The record says, a fever. But the cook Harriet Oakes testified decades later that she'd been told to prepare meals for 2 people, left at the bottom of the staircase outside Eugenia's room. No one entered. No one spoke of it. And when Isaiah's body was carried out, his skin was pale, his eyes open, as though caught mid-question. 3 weeks later, another man, Thomas Belalk, arrived. He lasted 9 days, then another, and another, each one fading faster than the last. It wasn't disease that killed them, it was design. A deliberate cycle hidden beneath the respectable silence of Southern gentility, where every breath taken inside that house was rationed by the master's belief in his own divinity. To understand Blackridge, you have to understand how the South worshipped hierarchy. It wasn't just about owning land. It was about owning perception. Vanderhorn's neighbors saw a disciplined man, punctual at church, generous at banquets, a gentleman who spoke of agriculture as if it were theology. But behind that civility was a form of madness refined by power, the belief that wealth grants moral immunity. His daughter, Eugenia, was his obsession and his curse. She was described as asubstantial in constitution, a polite 19th century way of saying large, unfit for society's narrow image of femininity. While other planters' daughters married into prestige, Eugenia stayed hidden. Her father called it protection. In truth, it was containment. She was his project, his experiment, his proof that science could be bent to justify any sin. The so-called treatment he devised required her to be alone with enslaved men chosen for strength, vitality, and silence. And when they died, every one of them, Vanderhorn called it evidence of weak constitution. In the end, he wasn't running a plantation. He was running a controlled environment, where God, medicine, and ownership fused into one blasphemous philosophy, that suffering could be engineered. By 1848, the pattern was undeniable, though no one dared name it aloud. 17 to 24 years old, always male, always recently bought. They would arrive terrified but strong and leave in silence, buried before dawn in unmarked ground behind the cotton gins. The enslaved workers at Blackridge understood what was happening long before any white man did. They saw the trays of food carried upstairs. They heard the sounds at night, soft at first, then desperate, then gone. They whispered of a curse that took only the new ones, and of a daughter who devoured souls without teeth. To speak openly meant death, so they learned to look down, to speak less, to pray in code. Vanderhorn's overseer, Marcus Gritton, eventually noticed the losses. Ooh, he confronted his employer, writing later to his brother, 17 gone in under 4 years. All hell when purchased, all dead within weeks. I expressed my concern. He said it was medical necessity. Those words, medical necessity, became the phrase that buried the truth. Vanderhorn cloaked his depravity in the language of science, and Florence society accepted it without question. Because that's what elites do, hide madness behind intellect and evil behind eloquence. Vanderhorn told Gritton the deaths were unfortunate side effects of therapy. He spoke calmly, even kindly, as if discussing crop rotation. He claimed his daughter's condition demanded exposure to a vital masculine energy, and that weak constitutions couldn't withstand the process. He didn't call them men. He called them instruments. And when Gritton hesitated, Vanderhorn reminded him who signed his wages. Obedience in that world was purchased through fear and comfort. From that day on, the overseer stopped asking questions. He learned to watch, but not to see. And in that blindness, the machine of cruelty ran smoother than ever. Eugenia's sickness deepened. Some nights she could be heard weeping through the house's long corridors, a sound described by one visitor as an animal learning to speak. Her father called these episodes of renewal. He wrote in his journal that the treatment was strengthening her spirit, but the truth was simpler. She was collapsing beneath the weight of her father's delusion. By 1850, 17 bodies lay hidden under Blackridge soil, their deaths explained away by fever and frailty. But what really killed them was the oldest disease known to man, the kind that grows when power believes it's holy. What made Blackridge so haunting wasn't just the horror of what happened there, it was how easily the world ignored it. 17 deaths, all young men, all within months of purchase. No investigations, no sermons, no outrage, because in that era, a white man's property was his kingdom and a dead slave was an expense, not a tragedy. Even the county sheriff, Coleman Pettigrew, paid a single visit after an anonymous letter reached his office. He stayed less than an hour. When he left, his entire report contained 3 words, matter resolved privately. The law bowed to the plantation's privacy, and the screams beneath those white columns were written off as medical treatment. But beneath the polished veneer of Southern gentility, people knew. Neighbors whispered about the doctor from Savannah who never existed. Merchants noticed Vanderhorn's strange purchasing habits, always young, always strong, always alone, and yet no one intervened. Because in the South of 1850, silence was its own currency. And at Blackridge, that silence fed a system older than America itself, where blood became therapy and death became inheritance. It wasn't just one plantation's sin, it was a mirror reflecting the entire order of power. Then came the night of the storm, May 12, 1851, the kind of southern tempest that shakes the world apart. Wind like thunder, rain like falling glass. The enslaved quarters had already been boarded up, not for safety, but for secrecy. Inside the mansion, witnesses said the lights burned past midnight. Eugenia's screams rose above the wind, not from pain, but from something deeper, something becoming. Gritton later wrote in a letter never meant to be found. She was speaking in 2 voices, one that was hers, one that wasn't. By dawn, the storm had gone quiet, but so had Blackridge. When the sun rose, the house reeked of iron and candle smoke. The servants who dared to enter found the parlor drenched, not from rain, but from blood. Vanderhorn sat in his study, eyes vacant, hands trembling. His daughter was gone. No footprints, no trail, no sign of struggle. Only her ivory comb, lodged deep in the oak floor. He told everyone she had ascended, but the workers said otherwise. They swore they saw her silhouette, hours later, standing in the field, barefoot, soaked, staring into the earth as if she could hear the dead breathing beneath it. For weeks after Eugenia's disappearance, the air around Blackridge felt wrong, like the world had stopped exhaling. Animals wouldn't cross the property line. The enslaved whispered that she wasn't gone at all, only beneath, buried with those she'd taken. Vanderhorn refused to hold a funeral. Instead, he sealed her room with iron locks and paid a mason to brick the door shut, muttering that she was still listening. His mind fractured. He stopped attending services, stopped shaving, stopped sleeping. Neighbors reported seeing him walking the fields at night, carrying a lantern and calling her name softly, as if afraid to wake something. By autumn, 4 more workers vanished, this time without record or reason. And then came the smell. Sickly sweet faint at first, drifting from the lower well near the Magnolia Grove. When Gritton ordered it drained, the bucket rose thick with rot. Inside were bones, small and disjointed, bound with ribbon. The doctor claimed it was animal remains. But those who looked closely knew. The shapes were human, and carved into one femur barely legible were 3 words scratched by a shaking hand. She still feeds. By 1852, the plantation was rotting from the inside out. Vanderhorn shuttered the east wing entirely, sealing it with black cloth and nails of silver. He forbade his servants to enter after dusk. He said the walls whispered back. Letters from that year, those that survived, speak of him conducting rituals of purification in the basement, chanting in a language no one recognized. He imported a priest from New Orleans, but the man fled before nightfall, refusing to ever speak of what he saw. The few who remained described shadows that moved against the light, mirrors that bled condensation, and a humming sound under the floorboards that grew louder when it rained. And still, he stayed. Every day, Vanderhorn would descend into the cellar carrying a bowl of raw meat and a candle. Every night he returned pale, trembling, muttering that she was still hungry but calmer now. No one questioned him anymore. Blackridge had become a tomb pretending to be a house. By winter, the cotton fields lay untended. The soil was black, wet, and strange, as if something beneath was breathing, and for the first time, the people who worked that land started to wonder, was it the dead they feared, or the ones still alive? The final collapse came quietly. No fire, no mob, no confession. Just a silence that spread like infection. In early 1853, Marcus Gritton vanished, his quarters empty, his ledger torn in half. 3 days later, Vanderhorn appeared in town, barefoot, clothes soaked, carrying a satchel full of human teeth. He handed it to the sheriff and said, she gave them back. Then he laughed, not a madman's laugh, but a relieved one, as if some debt had finally been paid. He was placed in the Florence Asylum, where he would spend the next 11 years drawing the same symbol over and over, a spiral intersected by a single black line. When questioned, he said it represented the mouth that eats time. Blackridge Plantation was abandoned after that. The state seized it, auctioned its land, and buried its records under bureaucracy. But the locals never went near it. Hunters swore the air around its boundary was colder by several degrees, and sometimes just before dawn, they said they could hear the sound of a woman humming beneath the ground, a song without words, a lullaby meant to keep something asleep, or worse, to call it back. Decades passed, and the legend of Blackridge began to rot into rumor. The Civil War came and went, but the plantation stood untouched, like history itself had learned to step around it. By 1881, the house was a ruin. Vines through the windows, roof half collapsed, floors caving into the cellar below. A man named Elijah Morton, a land surveyor, was hired to map the property for a new railway line. His diary survives. In one entry he wrote, "The ground hums at night, like the inside of a shell held to the ear. It is not wind." He noted the soil's strange composition, black, heavy, almost oily, and that no crops would grow there. While surveying the eastern boundary, he uncovered remnants of bones near the well, burned, twisted, fused with wax. He gathered samples to bring to Florence for testing, but never made it. His horse returned without him. They found his body 2 miles away, eyes open, face frozen mid-scream, skin blistered though there'd been no fire. The samples were gone. Locals said he'd disturbed the ground that breathes. The papers called it a tragic accident. But the sheriff who buried him carved a small spiral on his headstone and refused to say why. By the turn of the century, the name Blackridge had vanished from official maps, but not from memory. Children in Florence were warned never to follow the old river road past dusk. They were told of a woman in white who appeared where the earth turned black, her eyes glinting like lantern glass, her voice soft and wrong, like a record playing backward. In 1906, a traveling photographer named Amos Dyer entered the property to capture what he called America's forgotten houses. He took 7 photographs. Only one developed properly. It shows the decaying staircase half swallowed by ivy. And in the corner, almost invisible, the blurred outline of a figure halfway up the steps, long hair, bare feet, a dress hanging in tatters. Experts later confirmed it wasn't a light leak or exposure error. The negative was burned around the edges, as if something inside the image had tried to escape. Dyer left the state soon after and spent the rest of his life painting spirals in isolation. When he died in 1921, his last note read, "Issy was not waiting, she was guarding." And beside it, drawn in ink, was the same symbol from Vanderhorn's asylum journals, the mouth that eats time. By 1937, the state finally tried to reclaim the land. The government sent a team of 6 men to clear the ruins, document artifacts, and prepare for redevelopment. Only 3 returned. Their official report was sealed for nearly 50 years, but fragments eventually surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act. Inside were hand-sketched maps of tunnels beneath the house, tunnels no one had known existed, running deep beneath the cotton fields toward the well. Along the walls, etched into the stone, were hundreds of spirals, some small as coins, others taller than a man, and every single one had been filled with teeth, human. The team described a low vibration that grew louder the deeper they went. One of them, a foreman named Clark, reportedly vomited and fled after hearing what he swore was a woman humming below his feet. The next day, he hung himself in his hotel room. Written on the mirror in dust was one word, hungry, hungry. After that, the project was abandoned again. The state declared the land unfit for construction due to unstable soil composition. But locals still say, when the wind comes from the south, you can hear the hum, soft, rhythmic, waiting. In 1962, a historian from the University of Alabama, Dr. Ruth Calder, reopened the Blackridge case for her research on antebellum psychology. She believed Vanderhorn's journals hinted at early experimentation in trauma therapy, though couched in superstition. She gained access to the asylum's archives and the plantation site itself, which had by then become nothing more than a crater of collapsed wood and root. What she found rewrote everything. Buried beneath the cellar, she discovered a stone altar covered in a strange residue that tested positive for hemoglobin. Next to it lay a rusted phonograph cylinder sealed with wax. When restored and played, it contained a woman's voice, trembling but calm. It said only, "I am beneath him now." And beneath you all, the recording ended with a sound like breathing, followed by a faint child's laugh. Calder's note stopped there. 2 weeks later, she was found dead in her apartment. No forced entry, no sign of struggle. But the walls around her were painted in her own handwriting with the words, "She learned to feed without the body." The university suppressed her research, claiming it was inconclusive. But her assistant, before resigning, left a single line in her final letter. She's not haunting the land. The land is her. Today, nothing stands where Blackridge once ruled. Just a stretch of dead soil by the river, fenced off and marked private property. The state says it's unstable land, prone to sinkholes, unsuitable for farming. But satellite imagery shows something strange, a perfect spiral, visible only after rainfall, etched into the ground as if drawn by a hand beneath the earth. Locals still avoid it. Truckers say their radios go silent when passing by. Fishermen swear the river turns black in that bend each spring. And once a year, always on May 12th, the anniversary of the storm, someone leaves a single ivory comb at the property gate. Clean, polished, new. The hum still comes at night, faint but steady. Those who've heard it say it doesn't sound like pain, but hunger. And hunger. A hunger older than the house, older than the man who built it, a hunger that learned the language of grief and wrapped itself in silence. The name Eugenia Vanderhorn has long been forgotten by history, but her story isn't gone. Because some secrets don't die, they take root, they listen. And when you speak their name, they listen back.